I was never a military man. I was never in the military service in any war, so I was not knowledgeable about taking part in the military operations of this expedition. And I wanted to be in it, and I so expressed my concern that I wanted to be with Montgomery, and he found this for me to do. He came to me one day and he said, "I've got something that you can do." He said, the Canadians will not allow each man to haul his black powder into Canada. It must all be hauled by one person in a truck, fitted with a wooden box in the back of it, fitted to carry all this powder, and be no nails in it, put together with wooden pegs and so forth. They had the specs for it. So he said, "Will you do this?" And I said, "Yes, I will." I had a pickup truck, so I made the box according to the specs and put it in my truck. But a thought struck me that maybe I ought to check my insurance to see if I were covered hauling black powder. So I contacted my insurance agent here locally and put that question to him. And he said, "What's black powder?" He'd never heard tell. He didn't know what it was. And I said, "Well," he said, "I'll have to call the Home Office." So he called the Home Office, which was Portland, and while I waited and asked them the question, and when he said black powder, the man on the other end shouted back at him, and I could hear it clear across the room out of the receiver, "Black powder!" But then he got more down to earth and said, "Well, I don't know anything about hauling black powder. I'll have to go to the head of the company, and it'll take a while." So eventually he did this, and my agent called me back and said, "The company don't like it, but there's nothing in there that prohibits me doing it, and so you're covered." Well, I guess we better not say any more about that till we get up to where we're going to take the black powder aboard. Up at the Canadian, where we crossed the border.
Woburn?
In Woburn, yes. Yeah, I guess it's Woburn, yes. Anyway, the boys, the men with the black powder, were reluctant to give their powder up to me, but they had to. They just could not haul it. You can haul it in this country, no problem. So all the black powder was given to me to put in my truck, and I carried it through safely with the rest of us all traveling together. And when I got up to the armory in Quebec City, the armory had a parking yard, shall I call it, fenced in with chain link fence, and I went in there and parked my truck there. And in an hour or two, words filtered down to me that the commander of that armory wanted to talk to me. Well, I said somebody will have to get him to me, because I don't know where he is. And so that was handled, and they got me to him, and he said to me in English, he said, "You haul the black powder in here?" And I said, "Yes." "Where is it?" I said, "It's out in the yard in my truck, which has a box in it made to your specifications for hauling this product, and it's there behind the chain fence, and just as I drove it in." "Oh my," he said, "we got to get that out of here." And so he started to tell me where to go with it, and it was so complicated that I stopped him as best I could, and I said, "You'll have to send someone with me. I never could find the place you're talking about." So it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the men that he had there were reluctant to give their time up to take me into Laurentides Mountains and gone an hour or two, or longer than that. But anyway, he got a man, and I said to him, he'll have to speak English, or or I can't do much conversing with him. And so he got me a man that talked bilingually, and as we walked out of the armory toward my truck, I turned to the man and I said, "Do you want to drive it?" He said, "Yes, I'll drive it." So I gave him the key, and we got in, and he gave me the worst ride I ever had through that Quebec traffic. And he was in a hurry to get back, and I wasn't in any hurry to die with black powder in the back of my car. But anyway, he got us there safely, and he took us out in the Laurentides Mountains to a provincial, not provincial, federal, I'd call it, Army grounds there, and it was big. He said this is the biggest Canadian unit in the country. And so he had trouble getting through the gate, the first gate even. And what would I have done without him? I thought. So when we got through the first gate, and there were many more, at least 6, before we got to where we were going to deposit it. And the last one took all the matches and cigarettes and things away from us. I had none, but he had some. And so we were ushered into a cement room blasted out of the Laurentides Mountains. And there was a darn thing, I suppose it was what would be called an ammunition dump. There wasn't a thing in that room until we backed into it and put our powder in there. And so we put the powder in there and we came back. And so the next morning, we had to do that all over again. We had to get another driver. That driver was not going back, or didn't go back. We got a different driver, and we went up and got the black powder and brought it down, and then I made the inquiry back to the superintendent there, or whatever his moniker was. We were back here with the black powder. What do you want me to do with it now? Oh, he said, do anything you want to with it. So the men took their black powder back and sat there on the floor in the armory, and there in front of everybody and open, and I don't know, but some were even smoking cigarettes. They made cartridges of it. So what was so dangerous the night before turned out to be no more dangerous than some pea soup in the morning. And I intended to tell you back along about my insurance man. I did not tell my wife anything about what was going on with black powder. I don't think she even knew I was going to haul black powder. I kept it from her, and perhaps that was right, perhaps it was wrong. I don't know, but she might have put her foot down had she known it. But it all turned out well and safely, and I guess that's the end of that story. I am Cecil Pierce, and I've been asked to tell you some of the highlights of my trip from Augusta, Maine to Quebec City, following Arnold's route as best it can be followed today. It can't possibly be followed in some spots today because things have been changed on the river, and there's some things we still don't know about where he went. But my companion for this trip was Duluth Wing of Eustis, Maine. He was the chief forest warden in his district at that time, and so we were limited to when we could go on the trip by the weather. When it was dry and the fire hazard was high, he couldn't go, so we had to take inclement weather mostly, and it took us 3 years to find this kind of time to do the whole trip. But we did it very religiously and doing the things that we think Arnold did and making all the carries, including the 12-mile one. So this was about 1965. I'm not sure the date within a year or two, but it was about then. It was before AEHS was organized. But anyway, we started from Augusta, and I had built a canoe that was portageable, weighed less than 100 pounds. And so we started out with this canoe. It was new. And we drove down to what then was the yacht club at Augusta to set into the river. And I had the canoe on we could take me off the boat, and I had the canoe on my back, and it was low tide, and I started down across the flats with the canoe on my back. I guess I had boots on, probably, I've forgotten. But I soon realized that I was walking in a terrible mess. Some of it looked like human excreta to me. So I immediately stopped and decided that I wouldn't go that way. I went back up to where we started off the shore and went down the floating stage and run of the yacht club. I didn't ask any questions. We just went down and sat in. And we sat into the most terrible river that you ever imagined for filth. And every time when we'd make a pass with our paddle, that it usually makes, as you dip your paddle in the water, makes a little chuck, kind of, and drops of water may fly up into your face. Well, we didn't make many chucks before we made sure that we dipped very easily, and we didn't want any of that water on us. And as we went up through, the river got worse and worse. Still, on the upper ends of it, we saw the old-fashioned privies right on the bank of the river, and their product was dropping into a draw. So that's enough of what the river was like. So we devised this method. We always had two vehicles. We would put one up ahead, what we estimated we could make in a day, 10 miles. And we would set our canoe in and paddle up to it, and then we had transportation, and we'd take out and go back and get my car, and the next day, if it happened to, or the next day that we went, it might not be the following day, we would set in where we took out with a car again 10 miles up the river. And this worked out well. About the only way we could do it, and be sure we did the whole job. So the river was pretty placid till we got to Waterville. Then we had to portage around the falls there, just as Arnold had to. And from then on up, it was go as far as you could till there were falls or obstructions, some paper company dams and so forth that we had to portage around. And I think it was about up to Skowhegan. I think it was on a Sunday. The mill wasn't working anyway. And we got portaging around that and through the mill yard, and it wasn't long before the guard stopped us and wanted to know what the hell we was doing. And we told him what we were doing, and he just couldn't believe. He said, "There's no use to keep on going. There's another dam above here, and more dams after that." And we said, "Well, we'll go around them." So he let us go after a while, let us continue on. And we ran that. We went that first year till we got into ice up around Bingham somewhere. It was getting late. It was maybe November. This is 25 years ago. My memory isn't clear about some things, but I remember paddling in that ice and wondering what was doing to the canoe. because it sounded like smashing thin window glass as we paddled through it. But the canoe was fiberglass, and it did not damage it. And, so the next year, we were into Canada, and things got worse on that. 2 cars, and one up ahead and one backward, and a lot of driving, and so far away from home now that it didn't work so smoothly as it did when we were back in Maine. So on the Chaudière, Lou said, he said, I've got a motorcycle, and we could put it in the back of your truck and put it up ahead the 10 miles instead of a car, and that saved driving 2 cars into Canada. So this day he put the canoe up ahead, and the motorcycle up ahead, and I warned him that I wasn't going to be responsible for any part of it if he didn't find the motorcycle there when he came back. But we always did. We had no problem like that. But this day, we put it beside the road before we got to St. George's, as I remember it. And we paddled and left it there. And Luke didn't speak French, but he understood it, having worked across the border fighting fire some. And there was a lady there. This was not on Sunday, must have been a work day. But anyway, there was a lady there in a summer camp on the river there at about 10 miles, which is where we wanted to put it. We'd rather put it in someone's yard than just leave it there. So we put it in the yard, and he talked with the woman and told her what he was doing. I don't think she understood much of it, but she nodded her head in agreement that we could do it. So when we came along, the motorcycle was there, and we took out, and Luke took his motorcycle and went down to get the car to put the canoe on to go home. And so while he was gone with the motorcycle, I sat on the canoe there feeling kind of silly about it all. And the woman couldn't understand what we were doing. And I in English, I talked to her and told her what I was doing. She didn't understand that, but I pointed downriver and upriver as much to say we were paddling the river, and she couldn't understand that because nobody had ever done that before. Nobody paddled that river. And so I sat on the canoe and wishing Booth would hurry up and come. And he did hurry, but it took a while. And so she come out and wanted to talk to me. She had 2 children. They kept out of sight pretty much, but they wanted to look at us. It was kind of a circus thing. They hadn't seen anybody out there sitting on a canoe in their yard before, and they were small kids. And so soon she came out with a bottle of beer, or sent the oldest boy out with a bottle of beer for me. And while I drink a bottle of beer once in a while, I wasn't in the mood then, and I said, no, I don't want it, and shook my head in my hands. And the boy went back to his mother, and pretty soon she came out with the bottle of beer all opened. Well, I had to drink it or dump it, and she was watching me some. I drank about half it, poured the other half on the ground, made a big foam spot, and I guess she knew what I did with it. But anyway, I kept thinking, I wish Duluth would come. I'd like to get out of this place. She's got a husband somewhere, and he's going to show up here pretty quick. So sure enough, he did. And he come and he looked me over and said something to me, and I said something to him in 2 different languages, and that didn't mean anything to either one of us. So pretty soon he come out, and he had another bottle of beer. And I don't know what I did with that. I guess probably I drank it. But anyway, this was a hot day, and that lady was as slightly dressed as one could possibly be. This worried me a little because her husband might not like the idea. But anyway, Blues did come, and we got out of there and got a canoe in. On that, the next trip, we went on through St. George's, and beyond St. George's is the Devil's Rapids, so-called. The water was low, and it looked to me like we could run it. And we did run it, and got away with it. The next people that tried it lost their canoe and pretty near their life doing the same thing. So the Devil's Rapids and some of those rapids are not to be played with unless you know for sure just what you're doing. And after the Devil's Rapids, it was flat water from there on to St. Mary's, where we took out. And it was all paddling then, all the way down the Chaudière. It's a fast river. It goes there's a lot of descent. And I kept thinking to myself, if we ever get out of these rapids, you have to be on your toes every minute, you know. And when we got down to where the river was flat, then we had to paddle to get anywhere. And that wasn't good either. We said, my glory, don't this thing go slow, just paddling. But anyway, we got to St. Mary's, and we took out there, and like Arnold, we motored into Levis. And from Levis, when we got to Levis, the next trip, the next day that we worked, the river didn't look good to me to get across, because we had a good canoe, it was daylight, and still I was scared of the river, and Arnold crossed it in the night with ice skates floating around, and British battleships anchored there too. Eventually, we did get across. We made 3 trips to Levis, and the third time we decided we was going to stay there, in a motel or whatever, until conditions were right to, we thought, paddle at St. Lawrence. And that day we got there, things were perfect. The water was high, it was flood tide, and it was top of the tide, right up to the highway, and we put it right in, and there was no wind hardly, and we paddled across to the other shore. And we stayed a while. We even walked up on the Heights of Abraham while we were there. So we lost that tide. When we came back, there was half a mile of flat mud. We had to drag the canoe through and wade through to get up to our car. We couldn't believe it was so much. The height of tide, the rise and fall of tide at Quebec City is the second highest rise and fall of the tide from Tierra del Fuego to Greenland on the Atlantic seaboard. And that's why there was so much flat spot. Of course, Bay Fundy being the highest part, but that's the second highest tide there is. Well, that's just a few of the highlights. I guess I'll have to sign off.